Hey everyone, Temporal here, and today we are taking a look at Collegiate. For those of you who are not aware, we are just at the end of group stages here. We did 8 rounds of Swiss play, split between East and West, then we head into group stages, which have now just completed, and now the top 16 will be heading into the playoffs. And for those of you that are not yet aware, these are the top 16 right here. They are the ones who will be heading into playoffs. So we did do some analysis of the groups the last time that we were here, and don't worry, I'll go through and go over the power rankings in a bit, but we can immediately see, hey, some interesting things happened. The first interesting thing that happened is Converse dropped out, so Group 1 went from maybe being a death group where, oh no, there's too many good teams. Concerns would have been that Harrisburg will win the group, but then Lords could get the group, UCF could get the group, or Converse could get the group. Well, ends up UCF may have been touch overrated. TAMU was able to beat them out, so good on TAMU, and Converse dropped out before even competing in a match there. So this group pretty cleanly went to Harrisburg and Lords. Another interesting thing we had was Group 2 decided to be exciting, decided to make things a little bit interesting. We see Miami, Ohio maybe should have been the winner of this group, or maybe not. They actually went ahead and they didn't have some messy three-way trades between these top 3 teams. Instead, what happened is Miami, Ohio dropped a match to Mystery Machine, which is a solid 4-2, maybe 4-3 team, but really shouldn't be at the level of these 3 teams right here, Penn State, Miami, Ohio, and University of Florida Orange. Shouldn't have been at that level, but Miami, Ohio did drop a match to them, which makes things messy. Miami, Ohio then beat Penn State and also beat University of Florida Orange, who they'd lost to earlier this season in Activision Blizzard Collegiate, this league's Swiss play. So they got the revenge win there, but they also sort of made things complicated. Didn't ultimately matter because even though Penn State lost to Miami, Ohio, they also beat UF Orange, and we have our 2 teams coming out of Group 2. So a little bit messy there with Miami, Ohio, who has kind of over time been a somewhat inconsistent team. Their highs are highs, but they will have some weird drops over the seasons. They've once again sort of shown that character to their program. Then we move on to Group 4, is the next interesting group, where University of Texas Dallas, as you can see here, is no longer in our top 8. In fact, University of Texas Dallas used to be a bit higher. We'd have had them probably in our 7th spot within our teams. They can't be that anymore. They dropped, and they dropped to Rutgers. And this was a big surprise. Rutgers was rated not terribly highly. They didn't make top 16 or even top 32, I believe, in the previous season. They've been good prior. They'd been scrimming at a good 4-4 level this season. But, you know, lots of teams scrim at the 4-4 level. You got to prove it in the matches. They hadn't had any super meaningful wins, but this certainly counts as a meaningful win. It also, however, brings back flashbacks of last season, where University of Texas Dallas would have been considered to be one of the top 6 teams, and the top 6 teams would have been considered to be a step above the rest. And then they kind of misstepped, and that's where UCI really proved that, no, we're not going to be forced out by these teams. We're actually going to be a player. We're going to be in the top 8 and meaningfully in the top 8. And they took down in the playoffs University of Texas Dallas, and that was a bit of a surprise. However, and, you know, just to be clear, University of Texas Dallas is a good team. They did take down Northwood last season. Like, you know, Northwood, who at the time would have been considered the best team, second best team, that sort of thing. Or probably would have been considered the second best team at that point in time when they took them down. So, like, University of Texas Dallas has had a misstep last time in the playoffs, this time right before the playoffs. They're still making it into the playoffs, but they're making it as a top 16 rather than top 18, which means they will get fed to one of the teams, not Rutgers, who finished top 8, which will make things quite a bit harder for them. Nicely done there, Aiden. Aiden is from Rutgers, so nicely done there. Okay. Next interesting thing we had happen was over in Group 8, we had another one of these messy ones like we had in Group 2, except this one, we had them all trade wins, losses, however you want to think about it, with each other. So Illini Orange, I had thought they'd fallen off. Illini Orange earlier this season in NACE, which is a third-party league, but one of the bigger third-party leagues. Illini Orange was in it, and so was Minnesota, the Pizza Pirates. And that's cool. Pizza Pirates are a fine team, but they're not a top 16 level team. They're probably more a top 40, maybe top 30 on a good day level team. At least that was my read on them. And they took down Illini Orange. So I went, hey, Illini Orange was on the low side of top 16 last season. They must have fallen off. Illini Orange doesn't have any meaningful wins this season. So hey, they're probably not going to be a top contender for this season like they were a top contender last season. Well, turns out Illini Orange had a statement to make. Remember how I talked about how at the sort of end of last season, UCI really turned it on, got serious, beat University of Texas Dallas, went and did their California Cup between seasons, beat all the other California teams, has beat Boise both in NACE, again, that third-party league, as well as in ABC. Irvine is a good team. They're a top 8 team, and Illini Orange said, nah, we're going to beat you. Illini Orange lost to Boise, but took down UC Irvine, which since UC Irvine again beat Boise, and Boise beat Illini Orange, gave them this nice three-way mix-up, what's going on, and they had to do some extra play there. And unfortunately for Illini Orange, they did not make it through. The ones who made it through were UC Irvine and Boise, which was who I originally would have predicted, but Illini Orange certainly made things interesting. Turns out this may have been the death group. I'm not really calling any group with just 3 good teams a death group. The only reason Group 1 originally had that because it looked like they had 4 potential contenders. But yeah, only 3 real contenders. We're still not going to call them that. Still, this was an exciting group. So we covered the ones that were really interesting, the real mix-ups here. We'll briefly cover the other groups for anything important that happened in them. The University of Toronto Blue, overshown expectations a little bit. UCF Knights, undershowed a little bit. We see RIT Orange, hey, they did beat Mystery Machine. Maybe that means they're better of the teams on the better end of the teams in the top 32 since Mystery Machine beat Miami, Ohio. Or maybe that's Miami, Ohio just deciding that, whoopsie, we didn't have someone show up, or someone was super stressed around tests, or, someone was late getting back from work. Who really knows? As we move on here, this group, Grandview beat Kensaw. The interesting thing about this one is when we take a look at Grandview, we can see that, okay, cool, a win for Grandview. Yes, I'm stalling. Sorry, my notes got away from me here. Win for Grandview over Kensaw is interesting because Kennesaw has previously beat Rutgers, if memory serves here. So what does that mean? Does that mean, oh, hey, is Grandview actually the very, very best? I don't think so. I think what's happened is Rutgers really improved over the course of the season. That's the read I get, that they went hard. But ultimately, we will see here, because otherwise it throws things very, very into whack, and we've absolutely destroyed the rankings. I think we have to just assume that a team, in this case Rutgers, improved over time, probably combined with University of Texas Dallas having a misstep. But we won't really know until we see what happens. So that's what happened here. We talked about this one. Group 5, unfortunately, my team, Northeastern, did not make it through. Bellevue was able to edge them out. There was always a question of which of these 3 teams were going to make it. The other interesting thing happening in Group 5 is it does appear that Iron is not playing with Redbirds anymore. They were putting forward React, and they put forward React for their off-tank, who, isn't really considered normally an off-tank player, for both their matches against Bellevue and Northeastern, which did happen on the same day, but then they used React as their off-tank for future matches as well. And Redbirds would have wanted to, use the better off-tank option if they had it against the 2 teams in this group that potentially had the ability to threaten them. They didn't, didn't on the others as well as what I'm hearing through the grapevine, if he's no longer available to them, suggests, okay, Redbirds, we may move them down a little bit, and you'll see we've actually done just that. Redbirds in the past would have been in this monster tier, not at the top of this monster tier, certainly, but in it, we're going to go ahead and move them down to this contender tier for now. Oh, perfect. Luey's here. Perfect. We have someone from Rutgers here, and we have someone from University of Texas Dallas here, so we can see what happens. So Lueyyy from University of Texas Dallas says, I ain't trying to be that person, but to give context on our match, we were playing at a LAN for a match against Rutgers. We were down a player and we hadn't eaten. Ooh, sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that, Lueyyy. Totally get how it goes. So you had to throw someone up who wasn't a starter, or was it just chaos because you were late to start and trying to get that person, or what? But yeah, I totally get that. When you take a very full esports schedule, you're at LANs, you're trying to play from the LAN into a match that's not part of the LAN. I totally get how that can be stressful. You'll notice I didn't exactly tank your guys' rating over this. I didn't go move you down, to a place where, down behind Kennesaw, for example. I mean, I can't. Kennesaw didn't make it. You guys did. That sort of thing. Starter with sick happens. It absolutely does. It absolutely does. That stuff we all face all season. You try to sort of make your adjustments, but just like last season when Bay State wasn't particularly happy when I took some of their losses seriously that they took to, I think they took a loss to you guys and they weren't particularly happy about it, that I counted it against them. They fielded a team with players on their roster. It's gonna count. It's a varsity match. Same way when, that's how it works. Northeastern has certainly fielded matches where, hey, we don't have availability of our flex DPS or our flex support, so we have to field different people, and we still count those matches. Same thing with Miami, Ohio, where I know they certainly had a one where they fielded some interesting people against Akron. They got the win, so it didn't end up mattering, but they almost didn't, and it would have been real if they got that loss. We should not have doubled down with a land rep. Yeah, I had similar choices to make for Northeastern, and I chose against. There were 3 things we could have been competing in, all on that weekend, and I made the decision that no, we weren't going to. We were going to focus on ABC, which unfortunately we didn't get the win over Bellevue, but that's always hey, what decisions are you going to make? How much time do your players have? You got to balance. John Player says, I'm a main tank for a 3.4 team. We had a tournament over this weekend. We played Bay State in the finals. Bay State is just in every tournament. They're just in everything. Okay. So let's go ahead and continue through here. But thank you very much, Lueyyy, for that update on what happened. Sounds great. Rutgers played well, it sounds like. But there are some extenuating circumstances for University of Texas Dallas where they did have a player out. They were trying to perhaps do too many matches in a day, that sort of thing. We continue through. We talked about Bellevue did get the win there. Group 6, nothing too surprising. This is pretty much exactly what we would have expected. Maybe there was some question of, was GCU better than UCLA or vice versa? Turns out UCLA was better. The other thing that's a little bit interesting here is SCAD hasn't really been tested in what we've seen of play this season. So we look at SCAD, and SCAD would have been top 8 based on last season, and they, got themselves a top 8 spot again this season. But if we look at who they've played against, they did beat UF Orange, that's real. They beat UCLA, they beat Grand Canyon University, Akron, they lost to Bay State and Redbirds. So it looks like the right place to put them, but I'd like a win that's a little more decisive than UF Orange for locking them in here. That said, most teams don't have a win like Harrisburg does over Bay State to really lock them in these top spots up here. In fact, UC Irvine is a little loose in this spot here, even though I've put them over SCAD, because they do have that loss to Illini Orange, but they also have a win over Boise, and Boise's pretty good this season. They have a couple wins over Boise, so I'm choosing to put them ahead there. But okay. Did that wrap up our groups? Then we see here, nothing too interesting. Happy to see UC San Diego returning to form. They were good a couple seasons ago, and now they're not going to be making playoffs, but they did get, it looks like, the win over University of North Texas here. Cool. Good to see a little bit of a return to form over there, especially since they were doing well in Swiss. And then we talked about this. The only maybe surprise here is that, hey, Utah hung on in a group with 3 good teams, but Utah is historically been a real threat, a real contender, and they just didn't have it in them to even break into the top 3 here, and ultimately only 2 get through. So this may have been the closest thing to a death group in the end, though I don't think any of these bottom schools are that terribly competitive as actual threats to any of the top 4, especially not the top 3 here. So let's get into our rankings. We talked about why Harrisburg is first, no movement there. They've beat Bay State previously. They're going to earn that. Bay State has beat Redbirds. Okay, that makes sense. Maryville, Northwood, we're just going to put them where we put them for now. They belong in this top tier. We don't have information to put them at the top. These two having wins, you know, Harrisburg over Bay State and Bay State over Redwood, gives them a little more ammunition to be in here. These two deserve to be here just based on their legacy, their roster strength, what they've done. They don't have losses that are eliminating them, certainly, that are putting them in danger question like Irvine might be, University of Texas Dallas might be, or even Redbird with their roster softening a little bit more, maybe. Redbirds, again, they used to be over here. We've gone ahead and moved them down because of the roster softening a little bit there. University, or UCI, University of California, Irvine, they're going to sit here in this 6th spot, and we're down to a big 7 rather than a big 8. I mean, really, we're down to a big 4, but we're down to a top 7 as sort of the second tier here with 3 teams in here, because we can't put University of Texas Dallas up here. I'm ready for them to prove me wrong and fight their way through and make it back into top 8 or even top 4. I'm ready to see that happen, but they got to do it for us to move them. They're going to have a match against someone who finished top in their group, and, you know, that's going to be likely one of these teams like this. Well, SCAD actually finished 2nd in their group, but they had a group with someone else in it. Okay, cool. So then we move down here to our dark horse tier. This is going to effectively be our people that were, you know, were the second place finishers in their group in some ways. It's not completely that, because we see someone like SCAD. SCAD would have, of course, finished 2nd in their group, but they would have had in their group, let's actually double check who they had in their group. They had Northwood in their group, so that's no big surprise. So what are these schools and what's justifying the order that we're putting them in? Well, Rutgers got the win over University of Texas Dallas. We're going to put them at the top of this tier as maybe the team most likely to break through, in part because they will have a match against someone who was not a top 8 finisher. Or who was not a top finisher in one of the other groups, because of how the bracketing will work, and also because, hey, they beat a good team in University of Texas Dallas. Let's put them at the top there. Next, we move on to University of Texas Dallas, because we're not ready to just dumpster them. And we've, you know, heard from Lueyyy what happened a little bit there, but we're also in a situation where we don't think that they've actually suddenly fallen apart and are going to be terrible. They also beat, if memory serves, they also beat Bellevue. So we wouldn't want to move them down that hard when they've beat Bellevue previously. Next is going to be Boise, who was also beaten Bellevue. Okay, that makes sense. They didn't have the loss, Irvine had the loss to Illini Orange, but they've also beaten Bellevue. Makes sense. This is where Boise's going to stay. They're going to come out of their group with the 2nd spot. It was a tough group, but they got out. Bellevue sits right here because, again, they've been beaten by Boise. They've been beaten by University of Texas Dallas, but they have beat the Banana Slugs. Okay, that makes sense. So these are kind of locked in their order here in, okay, beats this, beats this, beats this, beats this, that sort of thing. This is a pretty fixed, locked thing. The only thing would be, hey, has UC Santa Cruz beat Lords? And the answer to that is going to be no. If we're looking at UC Santa Cruz, we can take a quick look. We can see they've beat Utah. They've beat Grandview. If we take a look at them over in groups, they didn't have anything terribly interesting, where they did beat UCS, UC San Diego. They beat University of North Texas, but they don't have anything super, super crazy locking them into this spot, but they did make it through top 16. We got to put them somewhere. It could be anywhere really between where they are now and Grandview, right? Like, it could be anywhere from here to here. Then we move on to Lords. Again, Lords, we don't have anything that's necessarily going to put them in this spot, other than the fact that Lords did beat Northeastern. Miami, Ohio beat Northeastern, but then lost to Northeastern. Northeastern has not yet avenged that loss against Lords, and I don't think they'll be doing so this season because they won't meet up with them again this season, which, hey, that seems like as good a justification of any to put Lords a bit ahead of Miami, Ohio here, especially since Miami, Ohio had that flinch where they did drop to Mystery Machine here. But then Miami, Ohio, of course, did beat Penn State. They're going to have to be ahead of Penn State there. And then lastly, we have Grandview. Grandview doesn't have super interesting wins, which makes it a little tough, which is why they're riding at the bottom here. If we look at what Grandview did, we can take a quick look as soon as I can click on the right tab. Be nice if I remembered which group they were in. Where again, they got the win over Kennesaw. Kennesaw doesn't have super interesting wins. Grandview doesn't have super interesting wins. The one thing that makes this messy is they do have one interesting win from Kennesaw, which is, again, over Rutgers there. But that just makes too much of a mess of things. That would potentially start putting us in, okay, things should actually look like this territory. And I'm not doing that. I don't think that's real. I just don't think that's real. So where does Grandview actually belong? Grandview could actually belong anywhere, but I'm finding more impressive, more meaningful wins that I can draw more data from out of the rest of these teams, so I'm putting them here. Maybe not fair. Someone on Grandview could certainly justifiably upset with me over that one. Okay. Yeah, it is interesting and unfortunate that they didn't find a way to advance Lueyyy, but that ended up being a scary group. Maybe Utah underperformed a little bit compared to previous seasons. We've talked about their roster being a bit worse this season than perhaps in previous seasons, but that was a challenging group, Group 8 there. UCI, Illini Orange, who ended up being strong again this season when it looked like earlier in the season they may not be, and Boise's looking better this season than last season. And UCI has mostly been looking better this season than most of last season. So it's certainly been an interesting one. Then we get into this next tier, and again, I should reiterate, everyone below this line has been eliminated from this tournament. And if I really wanted to make the most accurate power rankings in the world, I could actually probably put some of these teams above some of these teams. There would be justification to do that. That's not the wildest thing in the world. I could even put Converse back in here, who dropped out of the tournament. I could do those things. I'm not going to, and of course the reason I could do some of those things is because of the matchups and how they've gone. I'm not going to do that because I have generally centralized this tier list historically. While we take in data from from any tournament that I'm aware of that I'm able to follow with a reasonable degree of accuracy. Some of them are absolute nightmare to follow. I'm looking at you, NECC. Tracking from the match report score? No, thank you. But ultimately, we are going to go, no, if you made top 16, you are one of the 16 best teams. And if you made top 24, so if you got one of those third place spots, you are one of the top 24. And if you made fourth place, you are one of the top 32. But we'll order them within those tiers. So we take a look here. And we can see, okay, what's going to be next? Well, it's going to be Illini Orange. They had that group. They got a win off of UC Irvine, even if they then didn't make it through, then didn't get one of the spots. It's going to go ahead and make sense to give them this first spot in the top 24 here. So effectively spot 17. We'll then go over to UF Florida. That's not too wild. I don't think anyone's going to seriously have an issue with that one either. We can take a look here. We can see they had this messy, challenging group where, maybe they didn't quite get the wins there, but this was a weird, messy group. They did have to beat Mystery Machine, who beat Miami, Ohio. So maybe that means that, again, I think this is probably more Miami, Ohio flinching than Mystery Machine just hitting it out of the park, but it could have been. It could have been Mystery Machine hitting it out of the park. They're not a bad team. They're a team that would not have surprised me in the slightest to, for example, beat Rit Orange. They are a team that surprised me to beat Miami, Ohio, and would have surprised me to beat UF Orange and Penn State. But based on that, we're going to go ahead and give them the next spot here. From there, we'll move on to Northeastern. I don't think this is too terribly hard to justify. Again, Northeastern has the more recent win over Miami, Ohio, and, that's just how that one works. I don't know what to tell you. Bellevue absolutely got that win. Good on Bellevue, but, again, I have certainly seen how those two teams play, and I certainly know how that could have gone the other way. So I'm not going to feel too bad putting Northeastern in this next spot. Then, of course, comes Kennesaw. Kennesaw, has lost to Grandview, but Kennesaw has that win over Rutgers. We again see how this gets messy. And then we might do a tier break here after these 4 teams, but we're not going to because, again, we're doing these tiers down at this level for what makes sense, top 24, that sort of thing. Said my boys at UF didn't advance. Yeah, it's painful to see some of our top 16 teams from last season, specifically these 3, not manage to sneak their way back in. But that just means we're seeing some different teams find their way in, right? Like, we're seeing some different teams work their way in there that weren't able to get in there last time, which means you see some new blood. And these should all be good teams that earn it. I'll want to see what Grandview can do because, they're sort of a new kid on the block of sorts. Rutgers has been around, but looking much stronger this season, it seems. And then Bellevue sort of flopped last season, and that was a bit unexpected. Good to see them back in a place that's maybe not more to their legacy, but more reminiscent of where they were 2 seasons ago. I don't think I can tell you, they're not going to be the threat that they were 2 seasons ago. 2 seasons ago, they could have been a top 4 team. This season, they won't be. Top 16 is probably as far as they go, unless they get, like a gift in terms of their first round match. But, hey, it's good to see them back in play there. Cool. They had a similar situation as you. Too many tournaments in a LAN. I can see it. It happens. It's what makes, planning your program, scheduling your program. That's where your staff, that's where you're coaching. That's where your coach getting a read as the season is going on for how much energy your players have. Your staff getting a proper read for how many tournaments should we have you organized for. Activision Blizzard Collegiate is the most prestigious of the leagues, so we don't want to interfere with that one. Like, yes, it would be nice to pick up another championship here, win another tournament there, but let's be serious. ABC is the one that people will look back at from the past and go, oh, you have this many national titles, that sort of thing. Grandview does have some name recognition on their roster. Okay, then we move through here. University of Toronto Blue picked it up a little bit. They were, they were something last season. In terms of their wins this season, they did beat Rit Orange. They have the win against Shenandoah. We can take a look if we go grab their group again. There's nothing too wild here, but this did seem like the right place to put them in order here. Again, they've beat Rit Orange. Rit Orange is another one that we're going to see is in a decent spot over in a different group here. Okay, that makes sense. UCSD, I'm happy to see up here again. They did pretty well in Swiss play. It was good to see them at the top of the Swiss bracket for a while, hanging out there for a couple rounds this season, because a few seasons ago, they were, pretty good, top 32, that sort of level team, and good to see that they've put something back together and were a threat again. UCLA returns to about this top 24 level, which is about where they were last time. And then University of South Carolina was able, even after some forfeits, which is unfortunate in the Swiss stage, was able to fight their way through and prove that, hey, if they didn't have to deal with forfeits, they would be a pretty good team here. And they were able to do that with a couple wins. Again, nothing too scary in their group for them to really make a name off of here. Beating Scarlet Squires, okay? This was the group that we all sort of eyeballed and went, maybe University of Massachusetts, maybe Rutgers, Scarlet Squires. That's sort of what we looked at from the beginning to challenge these guys. It was kind of predetermined. It was predetermined incorrectly that, this would probably be the order. Ended up being a little different than that, with maybe Rutgers or University of Massachusetts being able to challenge them for it. But that's going to round out the teams that, were top 24 there. And then we move into top 32. I don't feel a ton of need to go over these incredibly individually, but we're going to see Utah, not as solid as last season, but hey, they're still in that good teams category. They still made top 32. Rit Orange, we talked about why we're putting them, where we're putting them there. Nothing too crazy. We get to look at Tamu here, and I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Let me take a look. Let me pull Tamu back up. Tamu Maroon, they get the win over UCF Knights. Can't really complain about that. Hey, if they took down UCF Knights, that's real. UCF Knights were expected to be a little bit more of a threat than they were. Would have been expected to place a little better than this. Would have really been expected to place number 3 after Converse dropped out. Instead, Tamu was able to take them down. University of Toronto Blue was able to take them down. Really can't scoff at that. They get their spot here. Grand Canyon University, don't have too much to say about this one. We've seen them. They beat University of North Texas earlier in Swiss. They lost to Boise, University of Texas Dallas, UCLA, Maryville. Hey, they did ultimately make it through here. This isn't the stiffest competition in the world. This clearly tells us this is not the University of Washington that we've known before. I don't know if these were forfeits or, they clearly didn't drop out of the tournament like Converse did, but this is not what we would have seen from previous UW teams. So, hey, that's interesting. They're there, but given that University of Washington went 0-7, I can't give Grand Canyon University a lot of credit for beating them. Beating Stanford, pretty much the similar thing there. Beating UCal Red, Arizona Wildcats, that's not going to mean a ton for me, which is going to be reflected in them being towards the back half of our top 32 here. OU, sure, no problem. UNT, again, little rocky in what they were doing in some other places, but they got it done here. And then Iowa State was the other team to get 4th in a group here. So nothing too wild. We can take a look. Again, UNT doesn't have anyone great that they came out on top of here. Nothing absolutely wild. And we would see much the same thing. Iowa State beating teams like Drexel Dragons, Boston University, which is like flat 4-0, things like that. SLU is, really closer to Masters, that sort of thing. And you can sort of see how we got these here. The one team I did not put up on the board was Rutgers Scarlet Squires. And you could look at Rutgers Scarlet Squires and go, hey, they deserve a spot here. Maybe they deserve a spot over here. Maybe they deserve a spot over here. I probably couldn't justify putting them much higher than here-ish. But that's what I've put for my tier list. Let me know what you guys think. I'll be catching up on chat now, my power rankings rather. But also, let me know in the comments. If you don't get to catch this live, what do you think? Do you think that I've drastically been unfair to Grandview and that Grandview's actually going to find themselves more like over here territory, more like over here territory? Do you think that Iowa was actually the best of the teams down in here? Do you think, no, Temporal, you're doing it wrong, you should try to individually power rank the teams in terms of, no, this is actually the 12th best team or 14th best team, even though they didn't make it through groups because the groups weren't divided all that well because XYZ and seeding and all that. I mean, that happens in every sport, but hey. Yeah, I don't think top 64 worked terribly well. EMF says, not gonna lie, I was surprised how many diamond teams were in our groups. We had a Masters team in our group as well. I think the rest of them were probably GM. Maybe we had 2 Masters teams, but if we had a second, it was High Masters. Top 64, I think, is probably a failed experiment for them. I was never going to take Top 64 seriously because the regions hadn't intermingled yet, which is why you'll notice I'm going out and doing Top 32 here, because while Top 16 is fine, I think we have a desire to see Top 32 like we would have in previous seasons, because Top 32 is a little bit more real than Top 16 without being quite as harsh of a cutoff, because, hey, we're interested in the top 20 teams or the top 32 teams. But I don't think we have quite enough in play. I could have told you that there were 40, maybe 50 GM teams in collegiate Overwatch, and top 64 meant we were going to get some that weren't that. And I'd say as some of these GM teams have realized, I'd say we probably passed peak number of teams. I want to say we're probably closer to 250 this season. I think at our peak, we were maybe 400 teams in collegiate, something along those lines. And I think what's happened, part of it is Overwatch, getting a little less popular on waiting for Overwatch 2. Part of it, I think, is some of these teams that were GM teams realized they're not such hot stuff. They're not going to be king of the playground just by having a team of Grandmasters. The top 20 teams, the top 16 teams in collegiate Overwatch are pretty serious teams. in terms of how it goes there. So no, you're actually going to have to practice. You're actually going to have to work as a team, that sort of thing. And I think that may have caused some people to back off, which is fine at the top and even at the below a top tier for a little bit. Collegiate is pretty darn competitive, pretty darn organized, pretty darn solid, and good team-based Overwatch. But I think it has caused some retreat in terms of the numbers of teams there. There aren't 64 Grandmaster level teams in Collegiate Overwatch. That's basically where I'm going with this. A little top heavy. It's become top heavy because again, it's I can't win just by having 6 Grandmasters on the field. Okay, I'm going to take my ball and go home. That sort of thing. There's a wide divide between teams with uni support staff and those that don't. No, that's not true. EMF is over at Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz sitting right here. They're a club team. This is a club team that is sitting here in the top 16. Like that, I don't think they're getting a ton of staff support and help and things like that. University of Texas Dallas has a program, has a very respectable esports program, but they've strapped it together with student volunteers or paid students who aren't making very much, that sort of thing. They don't have people that they're paying effectively adult salaries to really seriously run their program. They have a couple, and maybe their program's gonna come get mad at me for saying that. I don't think their players will get mad at me for saying that, but like, we have very good teams that don't have huge levels of university buy-in. Obviously teams like Harrisburg, Bay State, Maryville, Northwood, ISU, any UC Irvine, and Boise, they have huge levels of, buy-in from their staff, from their universities. But that's not true for all of these teams that made it and are playing at a serious level. Rutgers is a club team as well. Perfect. Rutgers is a club team as well. And I could get into other teams, like Lords would probably be like, they've got pretty good support there. But then if I get to, some of these others, they'd be in that pretty good to, hey, they're a varsity program, they have some support, but not like, oh, they've gone serious at this. Like, these teams that I've drawn arrows at have gone way more serious on how hard they're going into collegiate, and while they tend to be towards the top, they're not monopolizing the top. We've got teams, as you can see in here, that have, significantly less investment going in. Northeastern below Miami, Ohio, kind of crazy. No, I mean, we'll have another matchup against them, and I still plan to beat them. Like, Miami, Ohio, if they want to turn it on, can be quite good. Northeastern, if we turn it on, is even better. And we beat them in our most recent matchup against them, and we'll actually face them again in probably the finals of ESC, and we'll do our darndest to beat them there, and we'll get our title from that league. It's not as impressive a league as winning in ABC would have been, certainly, but you know what? We'll do what we can to salvage our season. Yeah, Miami, Ohio is very good. I wouldn't go underselling Miami, Ohio. Like, I don't go into Miami, Ohio matches thinking we win this 8 times out of 10. Miami, Ohio is not a pushover team by any means. All I'm saying is I'm gonna sweat and dunk on Heartache. Okay. Fair enough. And yeah, so the reason that you're seeing this, because I think I know who you are now, is because I did centralize my rankings. I decided, hey, you're not going to fall below top 16 if you got top 16 in ABC. Even though, yes, the reality is, yes, I could make an argument that, hey, Northeastern should be here, this sort of thing. Or I could make an argument that, hey, maybe Illinois Orange should be up over here because of how they traded, that sort of thing. Or, I could do those things, certainly, but they didn't make it through, and we've centralized these rankings a little bit around some of this other stuff. And I could do other stuff with teams down here as well in terms of, hey, they should be up in the next year. Mystery Machine, who we didn't place because they're a 5th place team, maybe should be up over here. Again, they beat, maybe Mystery Machine should be up over here. Okay, they can't be up over there because they lost to other teams, but maybe Mystery Machine should be up over here, this sort of thing. Like, it just doesn't work. I fully support dunking on Heartache. Okay. Joke's on you. We knew that we had a 4.4 DPS line, 4.5, 4.2 backline, but Diamond Tanks, Pandemonium. Got it. Nice. That does make things hard, Pandemonium, when you've got diamond tanks. Like, it hurts when you've got 4 or 5 players working with, 3.3 players or whatever. That's a tough one. Free Snozzler. Hope so. Hope so. Oh, Coach Pioneer over from Lord saying Tamu gave us a scare. Not gonna lie, I'm like 3 minutes behind right now. Okay. Took first map off us and took second. Yeah, that was us earlier in the tournament as well. We had a team that was like, wait a second, guys. I let one of our players not show up because I wasn't worried about this match. I let him go do another commitment. And like, this team who is a solid GM team but should be no threat to us is making us sweat a little. They put it back together and won, but it certainly caused us to sweat a little. I had a similar experience to you there, Pioneer, with a different team. But yeah, and Tamu is in our higher portion of this top 32 section here. Not top 24, because again, if we look at Tamu, they effectively got a 4th place, not a 3rd place, and we are centralizing it around that to some degree. Though, to be fair, we didn't do that for these top 2 tiers here because, again, we could see like SCAD got 2nd place in their group because their group also had, I want to say it was Northwood. But I'm not worried about that. So if we were to look at this from a perspective of who potentially has, yes, SCAD got 2nd place to Northwood. That doesn't mean anything that they lost that. If we look at this in terms of who potentially has the route through to pull something off versus who has something challenging, well, I think we can immediately see that the team that's going to have the most potential, let's quickly go through our groups and see, hey, anything that has a 1, so Penn State could catch themselves an easier first match if Penn State officially won this. Depends if this is actually, we can check the Discord real quick. I think I have that pulled up because they listed them in order there. And did they officially put it in that order? No. In group 2 in the Discord, they put it Miami University Redhawks and then Penn State. And they put everything else in the correct order, so I'm assuming that's how that went as well. So looking at that, Miami, Ohio potentially has a easier route through of teams that wouldn't be in the top 8, where they could maybe find themselves into the top 8 by finish, if not top 8 by actuality. We could find that, let's take a look here. Rutgers, of course, set themselves up with that big UTD win to find themselves in the top 8, maybe find themselves deeper than that. Maybe they could find themselves in the top 4. We'll have to see what happens there. And then other than that, everything else I want to say had a king as their group leader. Yeah, UC Irvine, maybe a little weaker of those. Maybe whoever catches them. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe someone's looking to catch UCI from one of those 16 spots, feeds effectively 9 through 16. The spot to catch there could effectively be, set your target on UC Irvine because, hey, they did drop to Illini Orange for a bit there. Or if you're Rutgers, you're going, hey, we've got a path through. If you're Miami, Ohio, hey, we've potentially got a path through. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. But let me do one final catch-up on chat here. Squires. Yeah, Squires. Squires should be on here. Squires, I wasn't going to list Rutgers twice, but Squires would have made the good team tier for top 32. Excited that it's not single elim this year. I'm jelly. I'm jealous that you get to participate in the top 16 that actually gets to wheedle stuff down a little bit because it's not single elimination. Before, there's always first and second place group finisher who got to play the not big 6 school in the round of 16. Right, and that was the thing. It was, hey, avoid the big scary schools for as long as you can. And originally that would have been Harrisburg and Maryville. And then Northwood added to the picture. So it was avoid them. And then it was, last year, avoid these 6 schools for this, and, that sort of thing. And it was the way through. And you might have said when it was lower on schools that it would have been avoid Harrisburg and Maryville, and then maybe to a lesser degree try to avoid UCI and Utah. But that's sort of how the history has gone there. With double elimination, it's not quite as bad if you catch a Harrisburg or a Bay State in the first round. Definitely be more fun games. And we can see some banger games in the lower bracket. I look forward to it. Okay, let me scroll back up. I missed some of the early stuff, I'm sure. Congrats to Rutgers. How was it playing your B team as well? Yeah, they got the Squires in there. You ate a good sandwich before the match, so you got a buff, Rutgers. That's the key, guys. If you want to take down a big name collegiate Overwatch team, you've got to eat a good sandwich before the match. You heard it here first. Okay. And, Temporal, I made a banger tweet about collegiate Overwatch today. You should check it out. We can do that. Let's head over to Twitter. I'm not going to open Twitter without first finding your tweet, but let's take a look. And what tweet did Lueyyy make? Okay. Yeah. So here is Lueyyy's tweet. And we'll try not to get demonetized or anything off of this. It doesn't like when we bring up social media because people have tendencies to say words that the algorithm scans for and doesn't like. But Lueyyy says it's disappointing that Overwatch Collegiate Championship playoffs are this weekend and Blizzard has done no sort of marketing for the event and not officially announced a broadcast for the playoffs. This is the last Overwatch Collegiate Cup before Overwatch 2 comes out, and there's been nothing. Please, Blizzard. Yeah, I'm disappointed to see it as well. I would have liked to see more promotion. People are starving for content. People are starving for stuff to look at in the Overwatch world. Like, come on, any news. There should be a hungry audience for this. Obviously, the audience isn't huge because the actual audience is waiting for the next game, but there are people sitting there twiddling their thumb audience-wise that would like to watch this, but don't even know what's happening. I, for a while, was doing posts on the competitive subreddit, being like, hey, here are the exciting matches of the week for the first maybe 3 weeks of Swiss. Ultimately couldn't stay on it. It was a lot of work for not getting that much traction. And the reality is I was also pointing, towards schools that then weren't streaming. Like, this is an exciting match if they feel like streaming. And then they don't, that sort of thing. So hopefully as the scene continues to develop, that becomes less of an issue. And hopefully Blizzard will put a little more aim on what's going on here. And then, we get tweet responses like this. Is there a bracket somewhere? I'd love to know who's playing. Again, no marketing happening, so people don't see this. Not no marketing happen. You have a couple YouTube videos like this one going out, helping raise a little bit of awareness, but that's nothing compared to what Blizzard could push out there. It's sad Blizzard hasn't done a better job of promoting the legitimacy of Collegiate. I agree it's sad there, Wiz. I think for Cal, we are going to try and maybe get some streams going. I love it. I'm happy to help out. As long as, I'm happy to help out. Tag me in. I'm not under the illusion that our teams are as good as Contenders teams, but it totally could be promoted as worth watching. You sure about that? Again, ISU sent 4 players to OWL last season and didn't win Collegiate. Yes, I know they were sick. But, them being sick was enough to close the gap for another team to win. So, okay, maybe not as good as Contenders, but how far behind sort of thing? Yes, there's a distance. The top collegiate teams are probably closer on average to the very, very top of Tier 3. We've seen that from interplay between them, but the very, very top of Tier 3 could be in Contenders if they had a qualifier tournament right now. So, calling this equivalent to, lower end of Contenders isn't really a reach. I think maybe just message speak easy or whatever. Yeah, for sure. Don't forget that Northwood has the slept-on roster that won a Contender season about a year before the match. I know. It's how that works. You could have looked at Northwood's roster last season and been like, that's most of Solaris, that sort of thing. Okay. And again, if we look at these teams, you're going to find a lot of these players have been in Contenders, that sort of thing. A little less true for UCI. But yeah. Okay. That's going to do it for now. Hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have, please drop a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't already done so for more collegiate updates, as well as Overwatch coverage and whatever else we feel like covering on the channel as well. But we have a pretty interesting mix. I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks. Temporal out.